Today on the podcast, we welcome Kirsten Jackson. She is also known as the IBS dietitian. She specialises in IBS and she's a fantastic wealth of knowledge. Kirsten first became interested in IBS because she experiences the condition herself. So she's the perfect person today to quiz and ask everything there is to know about irritable bowel syndrome, which affects so many of us. So she created the Take Control method. This is based on her now book as well, which is out and published, which revolves around 4 different pillars, things that we should be working on, from our mental health to our sleep and, of course, the diet we consume. So her new book, Take Control of Your IBS, the step-by-step guide that actually works, is out everywhere now. And we are about to have the most fascinating conversation and delve deep into everything to do with digestive health. Hello, Kirsten.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I think we could definitely start the conversation today by discussing the fact so many people experience IBS. It's just so common, and there seems to be so little that somebody can actually do. So what would you say are the main causes of IBS? What is it? What are the symptoms?
Yeah, so in terms of the main causes, we don't know exactly what causes IBS. And I think this is where it starts to become really grey and misunderstood, unfortunately. But we do know there's certain environments or situations which seem to be related to the onset. So for example, people who maybe took antibiotics, sometimes they then will result in IBS. Sometimes there's mental health issues, so anxiety or depression. Food poisoning seems to be related, genetics, sometimes there's a sort of relationship in the family, or even being female seems to have a higher risk of developing IBS. So lots of things that are related, and I guess we could probably do a whole podcast on maybe why each one of those would be, but it is quite a grey area, and symptoms really vary from bloating to constipation, diarrhea, and the severity varies as well. But despite it being a grey area, there is quite a specific definition, which I think often gets missed because people often get diagnosed with IBS almost like, oh, well, there's nothing else out there. Yeah. It's probably IBS. And then they feel like, well, is this even a real diagnosis, which is a little bit sad. And the definition for anyone that wants to look it up, you can check out the Rome criteria, because what I'm about to explain is a bit of a mouthful.
Okay, Rome. So yes. Acronym Rome.
Exactly. So Google that, because it is a bit to sort of take in. But essentially, when you look at IBS, it is very specific symptoms, and those symptoms have to be chronic in nature. So what I'm about to describe has to have happened once per week for the last 3 months, with an onset of 6 months ago. So we're not talking about digestive problems for just a couple of weeks, or maybe that day if you've had a bit of an off stomach. It's something that's been going on for a long time. Now, with the symptoms, it has to be abdominal pain once per week, which is related to 2 or more of the following. So that can be a change in your stool appearance. So when you're looking at your stool, or we'll say poo, because I hate it being such a taboo subject. It might have been loose or harder, but that's related to being in pain. Or the frequency, so sometimes people will get stomach pain and then they'll get maybe looser stools, or actually they become more constipated, they don't open their bowels for a while and then they have the pain. Or also it can be the appearance, so stools can actually become maybe like harder or looser and liquid-like. And again, it's related to the pain. So it is a bit of a mouthful, but it's what I'm trying to get across, I guess, is it is a very well-defined condition. It's not just a case of, oh, someone's having these random digestive problems, they probably have IBS. It's a really well-defined condition.
So we're talking 6 months, showing symptoms pretty much every week.
Exactly, yeah.
To have a technical diagnosis of IBS.
Correct.
And they'd need to go to their GP, obviously.
Yes, exactly. So symptoms alone, it doesn't stop there. Do not diagnose, unfortunately, IBS. There does need to be some tests just to rule out other conditions, because these symptoms, like the bloating, the pain, loose stools, constipation, unfortunately, they can be the symptoms of a number of other conditions that we need to get ruled out.
I found what you said at the start quite interesting, the fact that I believe our mental health just plays such a huge role. And then you said, oh, it's more common in women. And I found that quite interesting. Is that perhaps a hormonal change with estrogen, or is it because as women, we just crack on when we're experiencing these huge feelings every single day, the whole spectrum of them, and then they manifest in our body physically?
Probably a combination, to be honest. We don't know exactly. This is a problem. Every time someone asks a question, the answer is, we don't know exactly. But But estrogen-wise, interestingly, what we do know is post-menopause, so when our estrogen levels are much lower, the rates of diagnosis seem to go down. So that does indicate that actually there is something to do with estrogen. But also there could be an element of actually there is more men that do have IBS, or as much or many men, but actually they're just not accessing their doctor, because we know that men are much less likely to go and get a diagnosis. So there's multiple theories about why, women might have a higher risk, but potentially men might have a higher risk than we know about as well.
Because people just crack on. When it comes to digestive concerns, what is, I think, potentially concerning is that a lot of people live their whole life probably having had IBS or a condition and just thought, I just have to live with this. I have to live with pain and discomfort every week, and that's their reality, whereas it doesn't have to be that way.
No, and that's the saddest thing that I hear in my clinic. Often people have not just been diagnosed with IBS, or the symptoms didn't start last week. They've been going for 30 years or, most of their adult life, if not longer. And they're not a medical anomaly. We just need to apply the science properly for them to be able to manage this condition.
Because how do you know? So there's a lot of different digestive concerns out there. We see some of it in the Nutrition clinic as well. And it's SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or does someone need to be taking a test? I'm asked all the time about tests, and I'm sure you must get this every day. What are the steps in the other types of digestive disorders it could commonly be?
Yeah, so number one step, if anyone is listening to this and they have digestive problems, it's not normal to have them. You do need to go to your GP, doesn't need to be a gastroenterologist, and get some basic tests. And they will rule out things like celiac disease, infections, inflammatory bowel disease markers, cancer markers even. And they are relatively basic tests in terms of medicine, but actually they're quite broad in terms of ruling out quite a few things.
And does that take a long time for someone? So let's say you've mentioned celiac disease, and a lot of people diagnose themselves with intolerances to foods. Is that quite invasive?
So no, not at all. And actually during COVID, they changed how that's diagnosed. So for anyone that doesn't know what celiac disease is, because we're always presuming there's such knowledge out there, it's an autoimmune condition where we react to gluten wrongly, and then that causes inflammation in the small bowel. So celiac disease, it impacts around 1 in 100 people, and the diagnosis is just a simple blood test. It used to be more invasive. They used to do an endoscopy, which is a camera down the throat, a biopsy, which I have had to have. I can confirm it's pretty horrendous. But since COVID, they've realised that actually the results are really they're really accurate just from doing the blood test alone. So we're talking a blood test, which will then look for multiple different conditions, and a stool test, which is going to look for inflammatory bowel disease markers and also small amounts of blood that we might not necessarily see with the eyes.
That's so interesting. But of course, we're not talking about a home test blood kit. We're talking about going to your GP for this still.
Absolutely not. And there's a number of things that the GP will do that maybe we don't appreciate because they're so skilled at doing it, that is part of the assessment as well. So that GP might even be asking somebody questions about things like their period history, if they had missed periods, looking at their weight, looking at if there's any unexplained weight loss, other things, family history, which then indicates maybe other tests that need to be done. So it's really important that we don't try and self-diagnose, because you cannot do that just with these tests on their own.
It's hard because I think for a lot of people, you've got cultural backgrounds that differ, ethnicities, all sorts of things, and people have their own way of dealing with situations. So in the family, it could be an old wives' tale that somebody, grandmother in the family saying, if you're experiencing this symptom, then this means that you can never eat this again. And this has just always been in our family. Whereas actually there are ways to explore this, but it does take going to the GP, getting a bit of investigation going, because I feel like food is so emotive to everybody. We've all got our own belief systems around it as well as something that can stem culturally or in a family. How hard do you find it to get people to say, look, it is worth that trip to the GP? Because a lot of people say, it's too much, I don't have time to be on a waiting list, it all sounds quite stressful, but it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is worth it. And I hate to throw this word around, but I feel like we need to talk about it. But the worst case scenario, someone could actually have cancer.
Yeah.
And people don't want to say that, but that's a reality we're in. And we're actually seeing, sadly, quite a few people who are getting terminal cancers that could have actually been cured had they been diagnosed early on, especially in a young population. So chances are it is IBS. But what if it isn't? And you've just delayed it by a year or 6 months? it's only a blood test, it's only a stool test, it's only, half an hour out of your day. Really routine for the doctor as well. You're not wasting their time. People don't even turn up to GP appointments. That's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So go and get those tests done, and it will just put your mind at ease and just make sure we've not missed anything.
And in memory of Deborah Balbabe, who spoke about that all the time. Oh, it makes me emotional thinking about it. It's so, so important just to do that. Right, so let's talk about different types of foods and the philosophy that people have around them. So all these books out there that are labelled FODMAP-friendly books, and let's talk about what FODMAPs are, because I think they've kind of gone mainstream in a strange way without the understanding, and why it's important they're supervised.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought this up. So FODMAPs, there is no understanding out there at all, even within the medical field. So many people listening to this will be thinking, oh, great, now we're talking about FODMAPs. My doctor's told me go on the low FODMAP diet.
With no support or help.
Or a sheet printed out from Google that's partially incorrect. Yep. So in terms of what this is, the FODMAPs stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which is a real mouthful. But in simple terms, they're fermentable carbohydrates. So we find things like lactose in some dairy products, fructans, which is another type of one, things like onion, garlic, wheat products. And what happens is this happens in everyone's gut, is they actually end up right at the end of your gut where they come into contact with gut microbiota, they form gas, and they can draw in water as well. Now, in people with IBS, they have, I say we because I've got IBS as well, but we have a more sensitive gut. So that means that someone else might be able to have that pizza, but we end up the next day on the toilet with loose stools because we produce more gas, more bloating than maybe somebody else did. Or even with normal digestion, so maybe there's a little bit of gas from these FODMAPs in our gut, we experience pain or discomfort. So going back to what the diet is that we would reduce the intake of these carbohydrates for only 4 to 6 weeks. And then it's actually part of a larger process where we then reintroduce them very systematically, which no one ever talks about.
No.
And then there's diagnosis what their food intolerance is and how much they can have. So somebody might be able to have maybe a little bit of garlic and be absolutely fine, but actually lots of it, and that's going to cause issues. Now, the problem that we're seeing at the minute is this process has got over 10 randomized controlled trials on it. So we know it works for people with IBS, but it is quite complicated. It is restrictive. So people can end up over restricting. They can cause other problems, or it's been almost sold as this diet that you just stay on forever.
Yeah, no,
which is not true.
And I think the reintroduction phase is just so, so crucial. About FODMAPs and just going into them a little bit more, because I think a lot of people, like you said, they say, oh, I can never have onion again. I can never have garlic again. Is there a possibility that people with IBS have it at some periods of their lives that are extremely stressful and then it goes away again?
Yes and no. So the official line is there's no cure for IBS because we don't have anything in solid black and white research saying this management process cures it entirely. But what I have seen with my clients working over, with thousands of people over time is actually if we work in multiple ways to improve the gut function, their tolerance improves. So, and this kind of works with the theory as well. So if you think about something like onion and garlic, it's broken down by the gut microbiota. In someone with IBS, their microbiota is very sort of out of whack. It's not healthy. But if we look at maybe things like their stress levels and actually their diet and their sleep and other things I'm sure we'll come on to, their microbiota over time improves. Therefore, they're able to digest better. They don't have to have such a restricted diet. Does that person then, can they go and party for the next 3 weeks and expect no symptoms? Probably not, but they can live a relatively normal life with very few restrictions.
And I guess moving on from that as well with FODMAPs, all these tests, they're everywhere. There are so many tests, intolerance tests. I think we just need to break it down again because we discuss this all the time on Food for Thought. But why should we not be spending hundreds of pounds or going to a naturopathic option for these types of tests? We see it. We see people coming in the clinic with lists that they can't have literally every food. Could you break down why they're not accurate?
There's literally no scientific basis at all. And to put it strongly, like if I was recommending them, I would lose my license to practice. And this is what really frustrates me. Obviously, the governments know they're not accurate, but yet certain people are allowed to make money from it. And they're really preying on the vulnerable, which annoys me. So there's published research showing that these tests, there's no accurate way for a test to diagnose a food intolerance. And yet people who are genuinely really vulnerable, they want to get to the bottom of this, being left on their own, are being, scammed into buying these really expensive tests. There is an element of placebo there. So we know in IBS up to 50% placebo effect can happen. So people might even initially feel better from avoiding this long list of foods they're being given. But actually it just leads to disordered eating, further issues, and obviously then people are out of pocket. So please, I know listening to this, you might feel very much on your own with this, but do not go down that route. It will not get you any further.
And what would you say to the people that argue, because I'm with you, I completely agree, it's soul destroying. There needs to be so much regulation for so many areas of nutritional science. It's horrific what it does to people, because they then end up getting stuck in a period of their life where they said, right, this intolerance test said I can never eat peas again. And then their whole life they never eat peas and they don't think they can because they never did a correct reintroduction of foods following a dietitian's advice. But what is the mechanism that people argue? Because I hear them talking about their immunoglobulins or their white blood cells, for everybody listening, fighter cells, your immune system. Why do people argue some of these tests could be accurate?
So there's various tests out there, but probably the most popular one at the minute, because it looks sciencey, is a blood test. So they're looking for certain antibodies, which is part of our immune system. So what they'll do is they'll look to see if you're essentially your immune system's reacting to something that you're eating. Now, the problem is in a food intolerance, it doesn't even involve the immune system. So it's almost like saying, okay, we're going to go and test the weather to see what's going on inside the house. Like, it's completely different areas, So you could probably do the test 10 times in a row and have different results. It's completely inaccurate. And there is some science to show it might even show tolerance to a food rather than intolerance. But there's no... Because some of these things out there in the alternative world, there might be like some vague theory behind them. But this is just... There's no scientific basis at all.
I find it wild because people are training on courses that are not evidence-based to be a sort of nutritionist, which is very frustrating for us in our professions. And they're coming out with affiliate links to these particular testing companies. So they earn a percentage of income every time you send a client to test with them. They can cost £500 plus. These test kits. So anyway, everybody listening, don't fall victim to the marketing con. If there were an easy way out and one test we could all take at home, do you think the NHS would save thousands of pounds and time? Of course they would. We'd all have access to it. So
exactly,
we don't.
It's frustrating.
Let's talk about lifestyle. It was interesting how you said in menopause, with estrogen dipping, there were lower cases of FODMAP. Not FODMAP, of IBS. But could we start with the symptoms that trigger IBS? So stress. I think stress is just so huge. We all experience it. It impacts how we digest our food.
Yeah, absolutely. So stress itself, I think we use the term very freely without really thinking of what stress is. So maybe I'm very nerdy, because whenever I say stress, I'm thinking about purely scientifically what's going on in our bodies. And when we come into contact with stress, so a stressor could be something like having an argument, having financial problems, your child is not doing what they should be. These stressors, they trigger changes in our body. Now, our body is almost like in caveman times, because it thinks that when you are stressed, you are coming under attack, or you need to run away from something, which is what we call that fight or flight response. So the body starts getting ready to fight something or run away from it. And there's a number of physiological changes in our body that happen with hormones and the nervous system to get us, ready for this. And if you start paying attention, you might even notice this in yourself. So there might be, a colleague at work that potentially stresses you out, and every time you have an email from them, you might notice, if you think about it, your mouth gets a bit drier.
I think we've all been there. Yeah, that feeling.
Exactly. Or you get a bit nauseous in your tummy. And this is your body thinking that, there's an animal coming down the road attacking you. And unfortunately, the problem is of course, if we are being attacked, this is really useful, because we do need to get ready to run away or to fight something. But the problem is with stress is that it's things dripping in. every single day. So it's from the time you get up, or it could be overarching, I don't know, financial issues or, health worries, especially if you have IBS, and it's dripping in. And we know that that will make the gut more sensitive. And one of the changes can happen is your microbiome actually changes. So we know that can occur. But in short term, actually, you can end up with looser stools, stomach pain as a result from this. Some people I recently found actually have more of a delayed response as well. So sometimes the body prioritizes the getting ready for fight or flight. You actually don't get any symptoms at the time, but as soon as you then relax, the body then comes almost back online to sort your gut out, and then people end up with pain and loose stool. So it's, as I said, it's okay if the body's experiencing stress now and again, but I think in modern times we're experiencing it regularly and it's dripping in and we don't even realize, and it's really impacting us. And interestingly, people who have IBS, we know that they have got a lower ability to cope with stress. So you and your friend can maybe be stuck in the same traffic jam, and you will go into that fight or flight response quicker than maybe your friend would if they don't have IBS.
And it's so interesting because I know immunologists are always looking at things about delayed reactions and immune response with people that don't have a tolerance to certain things like stress as well. So it's so interlinked, how we perceive stress, let alone how we physiologically react to it. And if it's chronic, like you said. And then what about, and I find as a parent this extremely intriguing, sleep. I can see you laughing as well because bless you, you've been up nearly all night long as well. And I think it does impact our digestion.
Absolutely. And it's crazy because when I was writing my book, I actually was looking at to see the different guidelines, in the US, the UK, and then also Australia, sort of the big areas where we're doing research. And not one of them mentioned sleep. And I could not believe this because we're going into all the nitty gritty of all these dietary changes, supplements that can cost a fortune and things we'll talk about in a minute. And yet sleep, which is like the basic human need, was not discussed. And the doctor's not discussing it. The dietitians are not discussing it. So we should really be bringing it in because sleep itself, the quality and the quantity of the sleep are both really important. And most of us will joke about getting an early night, but actually it's about being able to be in bed long enough and have a good quality that's not disrupted. So we get enough what we call sleep cycles, because you go through a number of sleep cycles overnight. So when one finishes, the next starts. And each one plays a huge role within our immune system, our mental health, but also our gut function.
It's just crazy. How can we be so behind? I mean, but Matthew Walker brought out that book. I remember it was pre-lockdown, Why We Sleep or something. I remember reading it and thinking, finally, a book that's literally talking to me. Okay, you haven't slept well, therefore your mood's going to be lower the next day. Your appetite's going to be spiked towards this direction. But of course, for people with IBS, their gut hasn't had a chance to do what it needs to do overnight if they haven't slept well, and then everything's just on the back burner.
Exactly. And little things as well is it's going to impact your mental health. So, the next day, everyone can probably relate to this. If you have the same situation and you've not slept well, you will feel more stressed, more overwhelmed. That's going to impact your gut function. Your food choices, we know people are more likely to eat processed foods, like higher fat foods and things like this, which obviously is fine in moderation, but they make poorer choices when they've had less sleep. So it impacts, and also things like night waking. So if someone has had night wakings, that's directly linked to how many episodes of pain they would have that week if they have IBS. So whilst we can't always get the best sleep, especially if you're a parent, then there are still ways to optimize it within, what we are able to do.
Wow. Blows my mind again. I just think, come on, everybody, let's just be a bit gentler on ourselves and try and understand what everyone's going through when we don't have good sleep. It just impacts so much. You touched on supplements. I've been dying to get these questions in because I'm seeing people that are not holding themselves accountable online, calling themselves nutritionists, promoting gut probiotic pills, promoting glutamine powders they're saying can heal your gut, and they're making a profit off it with affiliate links. And sadly, they look like they're trusted sources. It is so confusing. What are your thoughts on these types of things?
Honestly, in some ways, I really wish they were true because, as a dietitian, I'd be able to help lots of people. As a business owner, I'd probably make money because I'd be able to sell it without losing my license. Yeah. And then I'd be able to, really get results. But there's very few supplements that actually make a difference. And when I wrote the book, it was almost disappointing because I felt like people really want that quick fix, don't they? We are all human. And there's you've got a few probiotics that might make a bit of difference, but I'll be honest, it's very slight difference. It's not going to be this groundbreaking change. Fiber supplements. And then glutamine maybe, but there's very little research on it. I've never used it in an actual client.
Well, that speaks volumes.
Exactly. And then that's pretty much it. I mean, even things like peppermint oil capsules, there's research behind it. But in practice, we don't really see it making that much difference. No. So it's not that we shouldn't try it. Maybe if someone, especially if they're on their own with this, it's quite an easy thing to try. But you've got things like prebiotics, slippery elm, or random kind of probiotics that people
are looking at symbiotics now as well, aren't they?
Yes.
Combinations of the two.
But I don't know where they're going wrong in their manufacturing, because it's almost like they've gone and looked at the research, which obviously we want them to do. Then they've looked at all these bacteria strains which do work, and then gone, I know, let's combine them all together, and then we can say they work for all these different conditions, and then put them in some random capsule. And probiotics are very, very specific. So you might get one strain at a specific dose that helps with even like IBS-D, but nothing else. And then as soon as you combine it with another bacteria, then it might actually have an interaction with that bacteria. It's not in a high enough dose. Maybe the capsule itself is not in the same format as it was. So again, it's just ripping people off, and it's really expensive. Or even fibre supplements. I've now seen bags of fibre for about £50.
My goodness me.
And I know, because I looked into this, it only costs about £2 or £3 to produce.
Yeah, that's so unethical to me. I find it really upsetting. And like you said on the selling of supplements, they then use the marketing of what makes all these people feel so much better. That's the placebo effect we talked about. When you start taking something new, it can change your behavior patterns just as much as everything else. And I guess psychologically that might reduce some symptoms. And then in a few months' time, they'll realise they've spent £200, £300 on monthly gut pills and they're back to square one.
Yep, exactly. So it is frustrating.
Oh, so frustrating. You answered that so eloquently as well. So what would be your top tips for anybody right now listening saying, look, I'm pretty sure I think I've got IBS. Are there any foods, I know we've discussed FODMAPs, obviously it's not a black and white answer, but are there any things that people should be a little bit more cautious with and just acknowledge every day and go to their GP?
Yeah. So obviously go to GP first. But with IBS in general, there are some things. So dietary drugs is going to be my number one. And I call them drugs because that's exactly what they are. And we kind of play them down because we consume them without thought. And that's caffeine and alcohol. So caffeine itself, I'm going back to Matthew Walker, who is the author of Why We Sleep. Is that my celebrity crush?
I know. When that book came out, honestly, I was hooked to it. Yeah.
It's very good. You have to go and read it. So he actually is one of the world's sleep experts. He doesn't drink any caffeine. So that kind of speaks volumes. And the reason is because of the detrimental impact it has on our mental health, on our sleep. But if you're someone with IBS, you already have a sensitive gut. So caffeine itself, it depends on the person. It can take around 10 hours to actually break down fully out of someone's system. And people are consuming it even sort of midday. That's going to have an impact on your sleep. But also, if you're more anxiety prone, that's going to push you into actually feeling more anxious. That's going to set up your gut. So caffeine, straight away, there's no need to be consuming any caffeine. You don't need to be as extreme as that if you don't want to, but just think about that. Can you reduce it down?
With caffeine, before we go on to the other implementations people can do, it's so contentious, and I don't know why. I'm the same as you. With any client that I've ever seen over the years listening to me knows that I'm not a huge coffee fan either, and I don't see the point in it unless you really want to feel the impact of that substance on one day. I'm going to call it a substance. It's kind of what it is. If I'm massively sleep deprived, I had a travel day like you've just had, I would probably have a cup because I know it's going to have a huge impact on me. But for people with anxiety that maybe they're experiencing things like heartburn, it's just disastrous. But so many people, because there's science, it could have positive outcomes on heart health and all sorts of other things. They're so pro caffeine every day, and I don't get it.
Yeah, it could be because they misunderstood the research. So there is some research showing that coffee is actually good for the gut, but it's because of the polyphenols in it.
Yeah.
And you get the same impact if you have decaf. That's the only thing I can understand. But people think they need it for the buzz. Again, it could be placebo. If you have it the same amount every day, it doesn't have the effect anymore.
No, because people have got used to that and they have their daily coffee drinkers. I also think how much money people spend every week. I'm not having a go at coffee drinkers, by the way, everyone listening. I know so many of my friends adore their caffeine. I'm just saying, just have a think about it on a deeper level. We're not demonizing it. We're just discussing the perceived benefits of it.
Yeah, especially if you've got IBS. If you don't have IBS, and I think take this for what you want to, but if you've got IBS and you're really thinking you're struggling on a daily basis, it's an easy win to reduce it down and do that slowly. And it could even be that you tailor it, because IBS is not the same every day. So I know with me, I suffer with anxiety, but not every day. There'll be days where I'm more anxious and therefore I will not be going near caffeine at all. So you could do that.
So management techniques with these symptoms, you discuss caffeine's obviously something to stay clear of if you're having a flare-up, for instance. What would be some other techniques or foods that people can turn to at times of need?
Yeah, so times of need is I would suggest going low FODMAP. So do have a look at that. So depending on where you are and what resources you have, I probably wouldn't recommend someone do the low FODMAP diet without actual guidance. But for sure, if someone is going through a flare-up, maybe that 1 or 2 days, then actually reducing foods down that would otherwise bring in more gas, more water is going to help. Eating regularly, because a lot of people will then just avoid food because they think, I don't want to put anything in my gut. Actually, that can cause issues and they end up just delaying getting better again. And then alcohol will be the other one, the other dietary drug, in line with caffeine. Alcohol, a lot of the time people use because they are ironically stressed. They use it as a relaxant. And of course, in the British culture, we see it on TV. It looks like it's really normal to come home and just pour a glass of wine. Before you know it, you're having multiple units of alcohol per week, but that will have a negative impact on your gut and your mental health and your sleep.
So many things. Also increases your risk of so many problems, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So just little things can make a big difference. And I think it's always, the bit I don't understand is that people will often be saying like, how much, they'll give me the supplement. I'll spend anything on the supplement. Give me this really restrictive diet. But when it comes to like, can you just cut down your coffee? Or can you just eat out with your desk, away from your desk, so you're chewing foods properly? These things can have such a big impact, but people are almost not really interested.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. No, but you're right. And I also wonder sometimes the money spent on all these pills and supplements. If you've just done 2 months of a subscription supplement, you could have actually seen a registered dietitian or nutritionist and looked into your health and got way more out of one session than the money you've just spent all year long on fad diets.
Could have got a forever solution.
Yeah, you could have got a forever solution. So we have questions from our listeners that relate to that. So fasting. We kind of vaguely just touched on it, could make it worse, but I think a lot of people now see intermittent fasting as this halo health solution, probably to IBS as well. Why is it not such a good idea for IBS?
Yeah, fasting. Where do you start? I think that's a whole podcast for you.
It is. It is. I think we did one before on fasting with Dr. Rona I think it's Dr. Rona? I think it was back in King's College, but we need an updated one. So let's touch on it a bit here.
So fasting, a lot of people will presume that it's good for IBS because they presume it's good for all health. And actually, it's really bad for IBS. We know that people who don't eat regularly, who skip meals, the symptoms get worse, probably for a number of reasons. So if you're not eating regularly, then you're physically not getting the nutrients you need. So you're not getting enough fiber, you're not getting enough energy, so your mental health is going to be impacted. And your gut can be slowed down or sped up depending on what type of symptoms you have. So it's just not a good idea. I know it can sometimes feel initially good because often clients will come to me with coping sort of situations where they'll maybe skip their breakfast if they have a meeting that morning because they don't want to have symptoms during the meeting. But overall, their symptoms then get worse.
Yeah. So it is one of those almost placebo things. Obviously, I'm not eating, so that I'm not getting any symptoms. But the minute you eat again, you're going to get the symptoms. So,
and worse.
And worse. So let's not fast. That was a good question from Megan. I like this one. We haven't touched on it yet. Sharon, thank you. Meditation and yoga is often recommended to me, but I'm not the kind of person who's ever tried this. I don't have the time. Should I do it?
So yes and no. I'm glad this has come up because it is heralded as like everybody with IBS should do meditation and yoga. Meditation, I'm with you. I used to be like, I cannot imagine that. And it sounds really woo-woo. But now the research is there and we cannot deny it. It is only 10 minutes. And I would say, again, if you can't get 10 minutes in your day, you really need to be thinking about what you're doing. meditation is a game changer for anyone, whether you've got IBS or not. And it's a bit like when you go to the gym the first time, you pick up a weight expecting to do a workout. You're not going to get the workout done. You don't know what you're doing. You're probably going to feel like an idiot and you're not going to get any benefit. And that's what meditation's like, because you need to train your brain to do it. So you need to give yourself some time with meditation. So commit to it. Do it every day, 10 minutes. Use something like Calm or Headspace, which both have published research behind them as apps. So they're very good. They're very user-friendly and they have free trials on them. And do it, say, for 3 weeks. Because after that point, you won't be saying to me anymore, oh, I'm just not into it. You'll be like, wow. Because you get that relaxation during the 10 minutes, but you're also using that neuroplasticity in your brain to create new pathways and deal with stress or anxiety better in your day. So honestly, from someone who was very skeptical about meditation, give it a try. Yoga, I'm not so convinced about. There is some research specifically looking at yoga and IBS.
Is that more positions, like yoga positions?
Not really, no. And there is some claims about this, about I'll try this position for IBS, and actually I think that's a bit vague, to be honest. It was just showing that people who did yoga regularly actually had a very similar outcome to doing low FODMAP. But low FODMAP diet has got multiple studies. Yoga, I think this is one. But it's not, there are other research that's been shown for other exercises helped. So I don't think yoga is this magical cure-all, especially if you find it really boring, that you're not going to sustain that. I would look at just trying to keep active. I call it movement rather than exercise. Commit to 30 minutes per day. And whether you are someone that likes to hit the gym or just go for a walk or even gardening, just moving outside of your office and your day-to-day routine for 30 minutes would be absolutely fine.
I don't know why, what you just said has hit me more. I've done so many series of this, 8 years now this podcast has been going. And I have heard about meditation and working, but for some reason, the way you just described that just hit me. It's like a workout for your mind. I know this, but when you said it in that way, of course you can't just suddenly sit down and expect your mind to be focused and be happy with it. You've got to practice it and make it something in your mind. I mean, I'm taking that away. I should save that for my food for thought at the end, but I need to keep trying with meditation. Very well answered. Sophia, this is a good one. I'm just starting the low FODMAP diet. What's your best advice? How long should it take for symptoms to settle down? So clearly, it doesn't sound like you've had much advice from your GP if this is what question we're getting here. This is really common, right?
Yeah, really, really common. So first of all, have you been to a GP to make sure you've had the correct test done, especially things like celiac disease, because if you go low FODMAP, you will remove a lot of gluten from your diet and then you can't get an accurate celiac screen. So go to a GP first. Then I would question, do you actually need the low FODMAP diet? I don't even use it in some of my clients, because you can look at, as I said, fibre, looking at sleep, looking at your caffeine, alcohol, other elements that you can look at, and they're easier to maintain, especially if you're doing this on your own. If you have done all that and you're going to the low FODMAP diet at that stage, then what I would suggest is working with a registered dietitian or having a look at some of like my book that guides you through it, for example, some sort of tool, because it is difficult, because initially from the outset it looks like just getting rid of foods. But the way I teach it is if you look at your normal diet, making swaps, because otherwise it ends up just too restrictive. So for example, if you eat a spaghetti bolognese, that's high FODMAP. Okay, I can make the pasta gluten-free, I can take out the onion, swap it around, rather than coming up with all these new recipes, which is just not needed. And then in terms of how long it should take to see symptom improvement, if everything is going right, and this is not in any published research, I see symptom improvement in my clients around 2 weeks in, 10 days in. Doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect, and the FODMAP diet might not actually resolve everything 100%, but you should start seeing significant changes around 10 days in. But I have to say, if you're just doing low FODMAP and your stress is out of control, your sleep, then we need to look at those areas as well.
It's such a tricky thing to address, and I can see why. It's just so dependent on where you're at in your life right now, what's going on, and if you're predisposed to this and you have IBS. It's just, it's so tricky. We're going to move on to our fact or fiction round. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. If you could answer fact or fiction to the following. There is a cure for IBS.
Fiction.
It's not possible to achieve long-term symptom relief from IBS.
Fiction.
A low FODMAP diet should be adopted long-term if you have IBS.
Fiction.
You have to cut out dairy and gluten if you have IBS.
Fiction.
That's a lot of fictions we've got in our Fact or Fiction run today. You cannot follow a plant-based diet if you have IBS.
Fiction.
Because plant-based diets are fine. It's just a myth, isn't it?
Absolutely,
Exactly, with all the fibre. Alcohol can worsen IBS symptoms.
Fact.
Having a consistent meal pattern can help to manage IBS symptoms.
Yep, fact.
Staying hydrated throughout the day doesn't help improve IBS symptoms.
Fiction.
Fasting is recommended for IBS.
Absolute fiction.
Oh, and then women are more likely to be impacted by IBS.
Potentially fact.
Potentially fact, because we don't know if men report or not.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Oh my goodness, that nearly wraps up the episode today. And there's just not enough time to cover the enormity of this topic. And it's just made so confusing, isn't it, with all the online voices that are not qualified to be discussing this area. I recall being at university, obviously doing my nutrition degree, and I always knew only registered dietitians should do FODMAP diets. I always knew that digestive complaints should be dealt with by a registered dietitian. It just makes no sense to me that the government aren't doing something about this. I guess it all comes down to money. So I think my take-home message today, my food for thought to finish on, would probably be challenge yourself to one new skill in terms of your life that you can do that will aid your digestion. Mine's going to be 10 minutes in bed without scrolling on my phone, just to lie back and go, yeah, I'm going to try and start my meditation journey. I think I need it. And I'm sure for anyone listening, small things can make such a huge difference. What would your take-home food for thought be today?
Probably the same. Honestly, this will seem so overwhelming for anyone. They're probably just going to shut down and be like, oh, that's what's interesting, but how am I going to do all of that? I would just reflect on your last week and be like, what out of what Kirsten said today is the biggest thing for me? Create what we call a SMART goal. So something very specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and then just conquer that first. And it doesn't have to be diet. It can be lifestyle or something realistic, and just see how you go.
Okay, now tell us more about the book, first of all, and where can everybody go to get it? Because I think this is going to be a real game changer.
Yep. So earlier this year, I had a book published by Bloomsbury, which was exciting. A bit of a pinch me moment, but it was produced just because I felt like everyone is being diagnosed or hopefully be diagnosed with a doctor. And it's good that they don't have another condition, but they've got this IBS and then they're sort of left to their own devices. And everyone's discussed they've gone to all sorts of weird testing, diets, or they just end up with symptoms for years. And there's no next step out there. Lots of low FODMAP books, which are lovely recipes, but there's no actual step-by-step guide. So my book is called Take Control of Your IBS, a step-by-step guide that actually works. And you can get it on Amazon, but also, your Waterstones or any of the other major bookstores, really. And it literally holds your hand through the whole process. So it's
very clear. I've got a copy at home. It does lay out everything very clearly.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That was the aim, because we know that people with IBS, they're very well researched. They've already done the Google. They don't want something that they could have just Googled. So it's got all of the research in it, but at the end of the day, it's very practical. So it holds your hand almost through it, step by step, and it goes through the 4 factors that I go through in gut health, which is nutrition, movement, sleep, and then, of course, your mental health. And it also covers things that you wouldn't really expect in there. So, of course, it covers a low FODMAP diet, supplements and things, but also things like, dating, being intimate with your partner, all these things that actually come up as issues with people with IBS and no one talks about. Yeah. So it's really practical as well.
I love that. It's so helpful and I cannot thank you enough. And then social media handles, where can people go to check out a bit more of that?
Yeah, so mostly on Instagram at @the.IBS dietitian. So if anyone does have questions, please just ask, because I don't really want anyone having to suffer with this in silence. There is help. You're not a medical anomaly. We just need to, as I said, apply that science to your situation.
Absolutely, Kirsten. Thank you so much for coming on Food for Thought.
Thank you for having me.